Hi everyone, my name is Kent Barber from Game Logic Design. Today what we're going to be doing is taking a look at Katana from the Foundry. And as our final result from this project, we're going to just create this little test scene here where we've got a bunch of spheres and a bunch of cubes all the same color on just a base plane there. And here's the node graph that we're going to be creating using Katana. Now this scene is created from Cinema 4D, so the workflow is going to be coming from Cinema 4D, where we have this scene, and it's just basically a cloner with clones. So we've got this area here that's cloned, and we're going to clone that up there, export that out as Alembic, bring that into Katana, and then we're going to set it up so that you can render it using Pixar's RenderMan. So Katana is a look development tool and lighting tool, and it's sold by the Foundry. It's been around for quite a number of years, I believe, and was initially developed by Sony. And it's basically lets you do a procedural workflow, bringing in multiple assets into very large complex scenes without requiring the need to load in all of the geometry. And that's basically its power. So let's just jump in anyway, and we'll just get started and we'll see how we can go about creating this scene. So what I'm going to do first is just jump back into Cinema 4D. Now I showed you before that I just set this thing up here. This is basically a clone with cloners. So this is basically the scene. And I'm not going to do much Cinema 4D here other than just show you that's what the scene is. Inside this clone we have spheres and cubes. Then we have a plane which is called floor. There are no materials on this at all. And then we just need to export this out. So we go File, we go Export as Alembic.abc. We're going to save this as scene A.abc. And by default, when you're saving Alembic, it's probably going to come out with 90 frames in this dialog, but we only want a single object. I'm just going to put that down to start frame, end frame 0, because there's no animation here anyway. And I'm just going to leave everything else as it is in there. We just click OK, and we'll export our scene. So I'm going to come over into Katana. I'm just going to start this as a brand new file. So here we have our blank file. So the first thing we want to do is we actually want to load in Katana, load in that file we just exported from Cinema 4D. So a little bit of information about the workflow here. This is the node graph. This is where you're going to be adding all your nodes. And you can right click and you can add your nodes by using the menu here. But if you know what you're doing and you know what nodes you want, you can actually just hit the tab key and you can just start typing. So I'm going to type in Alembic, and there's Alembic. I just press return, and it will add an Alembic node. And you can just double click this, and it'll set this basically as the active node, and it'll show its parameters over here on the side. You can turn that on and off when we have other nodes. I'll show you what these do as well. Now we want to load in this file, so we'll just do that straight away. We'll come up here and we'll go Browse, and we're just going to load in that file that we saved. So it was scene. Just click Accept. And the first thing you'll see is nothing will be happening in here. So what is going on? You've loaded this file and you've got this Alembic node, and you're wondering what is happening. So down here we have what's the scene graph. And underneath the scene graph, it has everything that's in this Katana scene. Now the interesting thing here is that it only loads in what is required. Now we've got this little error here because I changed that, but it hasn't actually refreshed this. So I'm just going to press F5 on my machine with that node selected, and it will refresh that node, load in the scene, and you can see our assets come in. And underneath this asset, you see floor and cloner. So over here on the right, we have a viewer, and this viewer is going to display only what's visible in this tree. So if I expand that floor, you're going to see the actual polygonal mesh for that floor shape. And so now that it's expanded, you'll see it in the viewer over here. If I collapse that, it won't be visible. Now we've got a cloner here. Now remember we had a cloner full of cloners. So if I open that up, you're going to see exactly that, a whole lot of cloners. If I just go down to this first one down here, cloner 10, open that up. We've got a null in there. Open that up. We've got a whole bunch of other clones. Open that up. And now we've got our single cube. I can open this one up, and we've got a single sphere. Let me just click on this. I'm going to go to perspective. Now, if I want to expand all of these to see what one of those clones look like, we'll come up to just this one here. We'll go expand branch. And now you're going to see all of those clones for one of those levels. If we want to see all of them, we can come up and go expand branch. And it's going to load in the geometry for all of those clones for this entire Alembic file. Let me collapse the branch again. So it only shows what is visible. That's one of the key things here. And that also works in conjunction with this tree up here, but we'll get to that later on. So the power of this is that if you have hundreds of Alembic files in your scene, or perhaps you have just a few Alembic files, and one of those is perhaps a very large world, you can work with the scene, texturing it and lighting it, without having to actually load in all of the geometry. You can just load in the particular geometry for the part that you're actually wanting to texture. So in this case, you may be wanting to just texture that set of cloners. And so you can load that in, do your look dev, and see what that looks like. But anyway, let's get right into this and see if we can just start creating our actual scene that we want to light and render. And we're going to create a couple of materials for this as well. So we've got our file in here. The next thing I want is I really want a camera. So I'm just going to hit tab. I'm going to type in camera. And I'm going to click create camera. So that's another node that we want to have a camera in our scene. And then I also want to have a merge node because I want to merge these together in the scene. So I just tab again, type in merge, press return. And now there's a little arrow on the bottom of these. You can just drag that and drop it onto this arrow on the merge. And always make sure that you drag it onto this arrow. Don't drag it on top of here. Make sure you drag it on top of this one here. And now basically that's merging it into our scene. So this is really our scene. So double click on that, and we've got a camera up here. I'm just gonna call this, actually give it a name. So naming is something you should probably do in Katana as well, or you should think of your naming so that you are going to have a lot of nodes, and you want to make sure you know what you're looking at. So this is going to be my scene. I'm just going to call it scene because that's just related to this Alembic file. And I'm going to have this be just called main camera. Call it main camera. These are all being added underneath the world here. So we've got the world, we've got the camera. And you'll notice here that currently this is only showing what's selected here. So if I click on this one and click the blue on the left, it's going to be showing everything under here. It's going to be the world, the geometry, and everything, basically what's in that node. If I go in and click the camera, it's only showing the camera. And now the merge is going to show both. Click that, you got the world and you got the camera. So clicking the left option here is another way to change what you're actually viewing in this scene graph, and then in turn it'll show what's being viewed in the view over here. Okay, so we've got two things in our scene, and to get rendering we're going to need to just add a few more things. So first up, I'm going to add a Pixar RenderMan global settings. Just put it in the scene, and let me just hook that up as well. And I should point out that yes, I am using RenderMan here. So to use RenderMan, you just need to come over to Pixar's RenderMan. You can use the non-commercial version for learning and trying everything out. And just install that from pixar.com. And when you're installing it, just make sure when you're installing there's an option that you need to expand. And I can't remember what it is off the top of my head, but there's an option to install the Katana tools. So just watch out for that when you're installing, to make sure you install the Katana tools along with RenderMan. So install Katana first, and then install the RenderMan Katana tools as you're installing the non-commercial version. Okay, just so we know what we're working on here, I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to expand everything. So we're going to see everything. So it's now loading in everything from that Alembic file. This just allows us to look at what we're doing in the scene, because we haven't got a big scene, we're just loading everything in. So that is our scene, and that's what we're going to be rendering and lighting. So to begin with, I'm just going to actually create a material actually. So these Pixar Render Man global statements just help for the rendering, all different settings regarding rendering and RenderMan. I'm just going to leave that as the default there. And actually under camera, I will leave that for now. Another thing that we need in here is render settings. So I'm just going to click tab and click render settings. Render settings. And I'm just going to put that in under here as well. I'm going to put that in there. And I also want to have a renderer. So I'm click and type render. And we'll grab one of those as well. Put that in here. This render is actually going to be what's going to be outputting the actual render itself. So the render settings that I got here, this is where you can define the kind of some of the settings for the render. So we're going to leave that as the 512 by 512 square image. And again, those are your Pixar settings for the Pixar render man itself. And this is the actual just the renderer where the output's going to be coming. So before we can do a render though, we need actually a material on this scene here. So I'm going to come over here and I'll tab again. And I'm going to create a Pixar render man shading node. And I'm also going to create a, well, actually first we'll come up here and we'll give that a PXR Disney node type. And then down here I'm also going to add a node, a network material. We'll add a network material. And this network material needs to have a BXDF. Now the BXDF is basically the bidirectional scattering distribution function. And that's basically defines what happens when light hits the surface of this object. You don't really need to understand any of that at the moment. What we need to do is make sure we have a, let me just zoom in a bit here. We need to have a, did I add the BXDF? I didn't. Okay, there I've added the BXDF. So now it's got the BXDF input, and we're going to take the output from this and put it into the BXDF. So the material from here is going to be going in. So this is just a default material, and we'll just call that actually a default material. So we'll call it PSN default, and we'll call this a default as well, NM default. I'm just abbreviating that so that we don't always have the word Pixar shading network and everything written in there. So now that we've got these two, we need to actually add this to the scene as well. So we add this to our scene by again clicking in the merge and make sure you put it onto there. And the final thing we need to do is we need to assign this material. So this material is now part of the scene. And if you think of Cinema 4D, basically what we've done there is made a material and it's just sitting down in here and it's not actually doing anything. So we need to assign that material and add that to our scene as well. So we click tab again and type material assign, add that. We can just drag and drop that straight in there. And by default, we want that to use the material we just created, and we're going to come under here. Let's just make sure we click down here so we're getting everything in our tree. And I want to use this material. So I'm going to use my middle mouse button here, and I'm going to drag this in and drop it in here. Now you could also just type the path into this as well, but middle mouse click and drag and drop will work. So now this material assign is saying that everything that's in the scene, up until this point, everything in the scene is going to get that material that we just created, and then it's going to be rendered. Okay, so that should be all we need to do to make sure that this renders. So let's have a little go and see if we can start rendering this. Now I've already got a monitor in here, but I'm just going to close that and just show if you want to add a monitor. Now a monitor is what you use to visualize your renderings. You just come up to this little arrow here, click and choose monitor, and it'll add a monitor to your scene. Up here, there's a catalog. Again, if you don't see catalog, you can add it from here. And this is where your rendering is going to appear. So with this node selected here, this render node, make sure you've got that little blue box checked on the side because it's going to say what's in your scene here on the side. Again, let me just show you that. If I click somewhere else, we've only got a camera in our scene, in our scene graph. So we want to make sure we have this selected down here to make sure we've got everything in our scene. Now, things in here don't need to be visible. You notice here there's nothing in this view because I haven't expanded that. So even though if I expand it, you're going to see it in here, but even if it's not expanded, there's nothing in the viewer, but we can do renderings. So we right click on this render here and we go preview render. And with your middle mouse button, you can click and drag this down and put it down into your monitor, and you'll see it when it's finished rendering. Oh, no, wait. I'm sorry, we haven't added lights, so I need to add lights to the scene. So let me just quickly do that as well. I'm just going to do a little bit of rearranging here, move these up a little bit. And if you find that you haven't got space on your screen, you can also just click Tab to make that full screen as well. I need to add lights to this, so I'm going to click Tab again and go Gaffer 3. I'm going to add Gaffer 3 in here. And now we got Gaffer 3. Now this is the lighting. This is the lighting setup. And now we come in to here and we go right click, add. We're going to add a Pixar dome light. We'll add the Pixar dome light to that scene. Now for some reason on my computer, sometimes things don't show up, so I just click F5 and it shows up. And we'll just leave that as it is. I don't think we need anything really in here yet. So now we have light in our scene. So now we can actually render. So again, I come down to my render. Just click here. Preview render. Middle mouse click. Drag it down. And drag that in here as well. And it's using Pixar's RenderMan to do the rendering. No, I've missed one last thing as well. So what's happening here is we're not really getting anything in our image. And the reason is because, now let me expand this thing over here so we can actually see our assets. I haven't set the camera up. So I did add a camera, the main camera. And let me just check that I've got the camera in the render settings here. Yes, I dragged in my camera into the render settings. And the thing is, we're not actually looking at anything. So let's come over here and click on our camera. So I'm in the view here. Click and go camera. And that's what we're looking at. So I need to actually zoom out so we can actually orientate this around a little bit so we can actually have something to look at in this scene. Okay, so now we know the camera's looking at something. Let's give this another go. Go down to here. Preview render. And actually, before I do that, I'm going to turn on live updating. Where is that? Render settings. No. Global statements. Under hider. So if you haven't got hider expanded, expand the hider. And there should be a setting here, incremental. Yes, turn incremental, set incremental to yes. Otherwise, it's going to wait till the whole thing's finished, then it's going to display it in the scene, or it's going to be very, very slow. So that was in the Pixar RenderMan global settings, global statements. You come under hider, and you can turn incremental to yes. So now let's see what we can do. Double click on here, right click, preview render, go to your catalog, drag that down into the monitor. And everything is grey. So the reason it's grey is because on the material assign, I didn't actually assign this material to anything. So to do that, you can do it a number of ways actually. But what we're going to do is, to begin with, we're just going to drag and drop all of our geometry. So I'm going to middle click on this geometry, drag and drop it on add statements. And now it's added everything into here. So everything underneath geo, which is just everything in the assets, is going to now be assigned that material. Alright, now let's see. Okay, so this is a bit of a trial and error, it seems, forgetting a few things along the way, but it's all part of the learning process. So, now we're going to come down, and if all goes well, we will have our render. So let me drag and drop that down into here. And there we go. We have a nice blue render there. And if we don't want it on a black background, we can change that in the Gaffer 3. So in the Gaffer 3, we can come down and we can say camera visibility yes, and that will make sure it's put into the background. And we'll just do another rendering. Drag that down into here. And now we've got the white background. Okay, so that's looking better. So now let's get into a little bit more of the material assignments. So what I want to do is I want to make all the spheres one color and all the cubes another color. So to do that, I'm going to come up here. I'm just going to select both of these and Control C and Control V to copy them and just put them next to it. On this one here, I'm going to call it spheres. So this is a Pixar Animation shading node. And it's going to define the color, the material properties for our sphere. And I'm going to make these red. And we've got our material definition as well. So I'm going to network material. I'm going to call that spheres. And we'll just leave that as that is there. And I also want one for the cubes as well. So let me just do the same thing. Copy, paste, put them here. This one selected. To select it, you can double click, or you can just select the green option here and the parameters will show up. So just click the green option there. And rename this to cubes. And then we're going to rename this one here to NM cubes as well. So now these two material definitions need to be network materials. They need to be added to the scene as well. So we need to just drag and drop these onto that merge so that they're merged into the scene. And if I just click this, you'll see them start appearing down here under materials. So we'll grab this one here as well and drag that down there. Press F5 and you'll see that the cubes appear under there as well. So we've got two network materials and one default material. And the idea is to have these network materials applied to all the spheres and the other one applied to all the cubes in our scene. So we need to come down, and what we're going to do is we're going to add another material assign and another thing called a collection. And we're going to assign a collection to a material. We're going to collect up all the spheres and apply them to that material for the sphere. So we're going to come up here and click tab, go collection, create collection, create. We'll just drag that in here. And I'm going to call this CC spheres. And what we want to add is a expression that's going to basically tell it to find all the spheres and put them into this collection. So under add statements, we go custom. And now we want to type in the location or a kind of expression to define all the spheres. Now what I'm going to do is just drag in the assets. And I want to say everything underneath this location, root, world, geo, asset, I want all of the spheres. So I could even have done that from the cloner because we know there's no actual spheres on the floor, but I'm just going to do it from here. Actually, I can even just do it from geo. And we'll do it from there. So to do that, I'm going to add 2 slashes, and I'm going to go star and sphere. And the reason I'm doing that is because what I'm telling it is I'm saying underneath geo, find everything that has the word sphere in it. And coming down here, we've got these cloner, underneath the cloner, got another cloner, and underneath that, we've got our polymesh, which has the word cube in it, and we've got this one, which has the word sphere in it. So what I'm trying to do is find all the ones with the word sphere. I'm just going to apply the material to them. Now we could also add extra expressions to here to tell it to find just the polygonal meshes that are called sphere, and we could also define it based on other parameters as well. It's very rich the way you can define these expressions. But for now, we're just going to say anything with the word sphere and it gets this material. So now we need, well, I just give this a name as well. We'll call it spheres. And if I just collapse that and just press F5 on my machine. So it's called spheres, and if we just double click on here to make sure we're at the same level in that tree, or again, single clicking. So at this level in the scene, you can see that we've now got a collections, and under collections we've got spheres. So now we have spheres, now we need to assign those to materials. So I need to make a material assign, drag that in here. I'm going to call that material assign spheres. I had the wrong one selected there. And material assign spheres. And we want to assign the material for those spheres. So I'm just going to drag and drop that one into here. And then we want to add the sphere collection. So middle click again. When I drag and drop, I'm always middle clicking. Drag and drop that sphere onto statements. And now we've got that as a collection within the Sailor expression. And we'll do the same thing for the cubes in a second. But let's just check what this looks like. So I'm going to click this left button here to make sure the scene has everything in it. Right click, preview render, come up to catalog, drag that down into here, and drag it into here, and we'll see what that looks like. Okay, now that didn't work. Now, the reason I believe is I must have done something wrong in the expression. So let's double click on this expression here, and let's just check here. Let's go to the root, world, geometry, asset, cloner. Let's have a look in here just to double check. So what's going on here is that we have used a lowercase s instead of a capital. So it's case sensitive. So it needs to be sphere with an uppercase S. So with that done, let's click down here, make sure that's selected again. Right click, preview render, come up to catalog, middle click, drag and drop. And there we can see all the spheres are now red. So let's do the same thing for the cubes here. I will just take these, copy and paste them, and put them just here for now. And I'm going to call this one cubes. And I'm going to call this cubes. And I could drag and drop that material in. So from that scene, I could drag and drop the cubes here, but I know it's called NM cubes. So I'm going to come up, I'm just going to call it NM cubes. And the collection needs to be this parent one here. So let me just right click and remove that one. And I just need to drag and drop the cubes one on. But first we need to add it to our scene. So I'll just come in here and I'll just connect that to here. I'll remove that one and connect that to the in there. So now we have our collection for our cubes. Now it's glowing red there, but if I just click F5, it fixes itself up. And we see now, because we've got the cube selected here, the collection is showing up. I need to give it a name, another name for the scene graph. So we need to call that cubes. Press F5, and then now we see cubes come up in our collections. So now I select the cubes here, and I'm going to drag and drop the cubes into our statement, and now it's in here as part of a collection. So now we're saying everything from that collection is going to be using this material. So that should be good to go. So now we just click this down here, make sure that's selected, so everything's in the scene. Right click, preview render, come up to catalog, drag that down into here. And I think I did the same thing wrong there. I haven't done the expression yet. It's a sphere. I want that to be cube. Let's give it another go. Everything's red. So we come up to cubes, come up to, sorry, the material up here, and we're going to change our cubes to be a greenish color. And now we'll render that again. And there we have it. It's now assigned the green material to all the cubes and the red material to all the spheres, and it's left the plain floor object with the default material that we created. Okay, now one last thing to show is live editing of colors in the renderer here. Now to do that, you need to first turn on what you want to actually edit live. So over here, I'm going to say I want to edit these cubes using the live editor. So let's enable that option there. And then I need to come into the render node, right click and go live render. And we just drag that down into here. And live renders take a little bit more time to load up. But once they're loaded in, you'll be able to change your material colors. And then I'm going to come up to my cube and just make sure I click the cube here because that's the one I want to change. And I can start changing some of the parameters here. I'm going to change the color to, let's say, a dark blue. But for some reason on my computer, I still need to press F5. This didn't do this previously. But there you can see that the render has updated there. Okay, I've figured out why it doesn't update in real time. So here again, I have my cube selected. I've got my color, and you can change the color here, but I'm going to open that up so that we can see it there. Now down on your monitor, what I had before was, if you click on this pause looking button, I had it set up to manual, and that's why I was always having to press F5. You can have it on mouse up or pen up. You can also have it on continuous. So let's try pen up for now. If I change this in the editor here and then I let go, it's going to update. Now it's going to update. It's going to update. And I could also change this to continuous. So then it's going to continuously render that using RenderMan. So this is how you can really get into your look development. That will be using a bit of CPU power if we have it on continuous. So we can just change that to pen up, and that will probably be better. So if we wanted to interactively change the sphere again, we click on the sphere and we come under here, we change this, and you notice that nothing's going to happen. And the reason nothing's happened is because we haven't turned it on down here. So we need to always make sure we turn that on to allow it to be changed by the live render. So now we can change the color of the spheres as well. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there. So this is basic colors with textures, without any textures on materials, merging objects into your scene using a single Alembic file from the scene here. We have a camera, 3 materials. The materials are using collections. So the collections here are a collection for spheres and a collection for cubes. The default material is assigned to a material assign here, and that should actually probably be called MADEF. So it's the default material assign. We've got a collection for the spheres, a material assigned for the spheres, collection for the cubes, material assigned for the cubes. The gaffer, which is the lighting, is using a Pixar dome light. And we've got render settings, which describe where it's, how it's going to look when it's rendered, the file format and as such. And then we've got the Pixar global statements, which define the settings for the renderer itself. And lastly, the render node. So that has taken the default scene that we exported from Cinema 4D, which was just a bunch of clones, taken it into Katana, set up the materials, and rendered it interactively using the live renderer using Pixar RenderMan non-commercial version. Okay, we're going to leave that there for now. That's 33 minutes. We'll get into another tutorial shortly that will go over adding textures, perhaps to this same model, but maybe a new model.